Let me explain something to you.
Come on now.
We're going to talk about explanations this morning. You see, in 2010, a new word entered the English language and was recognized by English dictionaries. Now, as with most new words, it doesn't describe something new, it simply gives us a way of naming a very familiar phenomenon. And the new word that entered the English language in 2010 was the word mansplaining. Mansplaining. Now all the women are saying, oh yeah, we know mansplaining. The men are going to say, what does this got to do with the gospel? But hang in there now. Mansplaining, it's a mock-up of the word man and explaining. And what mansplaining is, I want to make sure I got it right, so I went to Wikipedia. They said that it's when a man explains something to a woman, interrupting or speaking over her, to explain something she already knows, indeed something she may already be an expert at, on the assumption that he must know more than she does, even about things about her own body, experience, and life. That's mansplaining. Now it goes, men, I want to let you know now, not all of us do that. But don't assume you're one of the righteous. Because it points out that men do this and we're not even aware that we're doing it. Even though one person said it's a combination of overconfidence and cluelessness. Mansplaining. Implying that, well, she has to be ignorant, or at least I know better, baby. I got this. Mansplaining is what happened when Matt Damon was being interviewed by CNN and was trying to tell an African-American scholar of race relations what diversity meant. That's mansplaining. Mansplaining was what happened in a classroom when I was teaching about racial justice, and one of the men volunteered that, you know, all this racial justice stuff is overblown because we fought the civil rights movement, we won it, and now if these black women would just stop having babies, we wouldn't have any problems. At which point, one of the women in the classroom stood up and said, "You be talking shoot," or something like that. And I asked her, I said, now remember we're in the classroom, so can you make your observation in a more academically appropriate way? And she said, but he's talking shoot. And I said, mansplaining. And it happens almost by automatic pilot because we do it out of our conditioning. And that conditioning can affect both women and men, where women can become accustomed to mansplaining. Now, mansplaining. Peter is doing a little bit of mansplaining in today's gospel. He's mansplaining to Jesus. But when we mansplain to Jesus, we gotta give it a different name. I call it life-splaining. And life-splaining happens when believers presume that we know more about how life should go than God does. Now you see, Jesus is, in the boat, and Peter knows who he is. That's why when Jesus wants to go into the boat to preach, Peter lets him do that. And Peter's been listening to Jesus preach all morning and knows what the message is. So when Jesus is done preaching, he tells Peter, okay, Peter, set out into the deep and cut down your nets for a catch. And Peter has to mansplain, life-splain something to Jesus. He says, now, Jesus, look, boo, I know you mean well. And I know that you are the Son of God, and I know you are a wonderful preacher, and you are a great religious leader, but you got to stay in your own lane. Because you see, Jesus, I'm a fisherman, and my daddy's a fisherman, and my brother's a fisherman, and that's why we fish at night, Jesus. Because during the day, when it's the hot outside, the fish go to the bottom of the lake where it's cool, and you can't catch them. Now, we were out all night last night, and we didn't catch anything. Now, you want us to go out in the heat of the day and catch some fish. Now, obviously, you just don't know how it works. I'm a fisherman. My daddy's a fisherman. Now, you've got some credentials. I'll give you those. But, okay, if you want to go out there, we will. Just to show how wrong you are. You want it, I'll do it. He was life-splaining to Jesus. Now, lest we get too hard on Peter, I would venture to say that most Christians, at some point, we are guilty of life-splaining to God, presuming that we know better how our life should be, how the world should be, and certainly more about how somebody else's life should be. In our prayer, we pray, Our Father, thy will be done. But then it has a parenthesis, and your will should be mine. Too often our prayers are not searches for guidance or help, but we spend our time telling Jesus what Jesus should do. Because we're life-splaining to Jesus, presuming that we know better than Jesus what should happen in our life. Now, what happens when Peter life-splains to Jesus, telling Jesus to stick in your own lane? Jesus, God-splains to Peter. Now, when God splains things to us, he doesn't talk over us. He doesn't interrupt us. When God splains to us, God shows us how his plan was better than yours. And God shows us how his vision is bigger than yours and was going to give you more than you could have ever imagined. So Jesus God-splains to Peter and says, okay, you're praying for some fish. Here's some fish. He gave Peter more fish than he could handle. He said, you're a fisherman. You need 2 boats and they're both sinking. I'm giving you so many fish. You prayed all night and for fish. I'm going to give you what you asked for and more than you could dream. And then you called yourself a fisherman. But that is too small. I know your daddy's a fisherman. And I know your brother's a fisherman. And I know you're proud of being a fisherman. But that identity is too small for you. I made you for bigger things. I made you for larger things. You're not going to catch fish. You're going to catch women and men, because I'm going to make you the leader of a new faith movement. I'm going to make you my ambassador. I'm going to make you my messenger. And all that stuff you were dreaming about and praying about, it's too small. That's how God explains to us. We spend all our time explaining life to God, and then God explains to us, showing us how our vision was too small, our dreams were too narrow, our vision too limited. Now that's how God explains to Peter, but how does it work for us? Let me give you an example. My mother passed away some years ago, and before she passed, she was in a home hospice program. But she didn't go into home hospice willingly. Oh no. That was one of the most stubborn women I ever met. People say the apple don't fall far from the tree, so I guess I'm stubborn too. But anyway, she would be just a champion resistor. She'd go to one doctor, the doctor would say something she didn't like, she'd go and find another doctor. That doctor told her what she didn't want to hear, she found another one. And then that doctor told her what she didn't want to hear, and she pretended he didn't say it. I remember when she came home, I said, "What did the doctor say, Mama?" He said, "Oh, he said there's been no change in my lungs." I said, "There's no change in your lungs. You ain't got no lung there." She said, "Well, you ain't got to put it like that." And I said, "Well, that's the truth, Mama. That's the truth." And so finally she got to the point where we couldn't take care of her anymore without any extra help. And so I said, "Mama, you got to go into a home hospice program. Why don't you want to go?" And she said, "I've been praying for a miracle. And I feel as if I go into hospice, I'm giving up on God, and I'm saying that God can't work a miracle." And I looked at her and I said, from some deep place within, I said, "Mama, I still believe that God's going to work a miracle, but it's probably going to be one that neither one of us expects." So she went into hospice kicking and screaming and kicking. She didn't scream, she couldn't get her lungs filling up that well. But she went kicking, and something amazing happened. Her spirit lightened up. She started smiling again. She even went out and got her hair and her nails done. And the hospice people arranged for family meetings so that we could all, my brothers and sisters, tell her what we needed to say to her, and she could say what she needed to say to us. And they could tell us when she was going to pass. At the moment of her passing, all 5 of us were around her at her bedside, praying her into glory. It was indeed a miracle. But it wasn't what we were praying for, because God was God-splaining to us, showing us that our prayers were too small, and our vision too limited, and our dreams too puny. God wanted to do more for us than we even knew we wanted for ourselves. That's how God explains to us. Now, some of you might be saying, "Well, what has this got to do with African American celebration and Black History Month?" Well, we talked about mansplaining. We got to talk about white-splaining now. Oh, now wait a minute. Now you were all with me. We're talking about mansplaining. Now I mentioned white-splaining. Everyone gets, ooh, no. White-splaining, let's be honest here, happens when certain folks who are more pigmentationally challenged tell people of color what their experiences mean or should mean. And we know how this works. If you live in substandard housing, it's because you didn't keep it up. If you don't have a decent education, it's because you didn't study hard enough. If you're poor, it's because you're lazy and you didn't work hard enough. And if you are beat up or shot by the police, it's probably because you did something to deserve it. That's white-splaining. And white-splaining in I remember one famous one of white-splaining I had was when I'm teaching this class and I was lamenting the fact that you can graduate from college and never really meaningfully encounter African American history. And one of my precious little white students said to me, well, I'm sure that if black people had done something meaningful in history, we would have studied it. White-splaining, telling us the meaning of our experiences. Now, white-splaining in all of its forms boils down to this, that there's something inherently wrong with black people, that we are fundamentally flawed, that there is a design defect. And because of that design defect, that's why we're always at the bottom. I say a picture's worth 1,000 words, so Christopher, can you pull up that picture for me? This is a picture that was published in a national newspaper in the 1930s. It's seeing African Americans in stereotypical garb that's there. And the caption underneath it says, God made the little N-words. He made them in the night. He made them in a hurry and forgot to make them white. I showed this slide in an adult presentation I was giving, and one of the women came up to me in tears afterwards and said, that was in my grade school religion book. This is white-splaining, presuming to tell us the meaning of our experiences, and the reason why we are where we are is because of a design defect, a fundamental flaw, that God made us in a hurry, that we're some afterthought in the image of God. Now, we know that's a lie. We know it's a lie simply because for two reasons. One, our own experience tells us it's a lie, because we know that if you can be lazy and still do quite well in life, we got someone that's quite lazy who's living in 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. I mean, seriously, folks, how many of us can have hours of executive time, a half-hour meeting a day, and get paid $450,000 a year? But we also know it's a lie because God explains to us. God meets white-splaining with God-splaining. And when God explains to us, God says, I created everyone in my image. Everyone in my image. And that means that each one of us bears a reflection of God's beauty and God's glory. Each one of us, when God looks at each one of us, God is looking in a mirror and says, you reveal my glory, and you reveal my glory, and you reveal my glory. And anytime anyone tells us or has a social practice that treats anyone of any race, of any color, of any creed, of any sexual orientation or way of life, and by saying that you are somehow defective, we have to say that is blasphemy, that is idolatry, that is a lie. That is a lie. And we have to build a world that's more appropriate to God's dream. A world where the glory and the beauty of every human being is reflected and loved and cherished and protected and promoted. There ain't no walls in God's dream.
Come on now.
There ain't no walls in God's dream. No, in God's dream, there are only pearly gates, not steel slats. No. God counters our life-splaining, our mansplaining, and our white-splaining with God-splaining, showing us that God has a bigger vision, a wider plan, a deeper dream. And he calls for all of us to follow. He says to each of us in the words of the prophet Isaiah, whom shall I send with this vision and dream? And he wants us each to say, here I am, send me. Send me. So today in our African American celebration, we give thanks for women and men of every race, of every hue, of every religion and gender and way of loving as we work together to live together, to build together, and to make this old world a new world, a world that is bigger than we could ever imagine and dream. Because that is how God has explained it to us. Amen.